Imagine sacrificing your youth, your sleep, and your mind to make two people billionaires, only for them to decide you are worth more to them dead than alive. In the cutthroat glass towers of modern venture capital, human beings aren't treated as people. They are treated as assets, understood when useful, traded when convenient, and liquidated the moment they become a liability. We like to believe that greed has limits. We like to believe that if we build the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar empire, the people at the top will look at us with gratitude. But gratitude is a luxury the elite cannot afford. This is the story of Leo, a master algorithmic coder whose only crime was being too brilliant for his own good. It is the story of Julian and Christian, two corporate predators who thought they could bury a man and inherit his ghost. But above all, it is the story of Felix, an identical twin who proved that no matter how deep you dig a grave in the mud of corporate lies, the truth will always find a way to hack its way back to the surface. To the public, Apex Capital was the crown jewel of the financial tech world. It was a firm built on clean lines, flawless public relations, and a string of impossibly successful investments. And at the center of that spotlight stood two men, Julian and Christian. Julian was a modern corporate psychopath disguised in a tailored three-piece suit. He possessed a gaze that could freeze water and a voice that radiated absolute control. He didn't build things, he conquered them. Christian, his partner, was the operational engine, wealthy, highly connected, but fundamentally fragile. Christian was a man who loved the status of a god but lacked the stomach for the sacrifice. But empires aren't built by the men in the commercials. They are built by the men in the dark. Deep in the windowless basement server rooms of Apex Capital sat Leo. Leo didn't care about the corporate galas, the luxury sports cars, or the million-dollar bonuses. He wore simple black hoodies, drank cold coffee, and spent 18 hours a day writing the proprietary high-frequency trading algorithms that drove 90% of Apex Capital's revenue. Leo didn't crave power. He just wanted to provide a life of absolute security for his family and his twin brother, Felix. For 3 years, Julian and Christian treated Leo like their private miracle worker. "Just one more algorithm, Leo," Julian would say, patting his shoulder with a heavy, expensive watch scraping against Leo's shoulder. "We're family here, we build together." And Leo believed them until the code began to look back at him. It happened during a routine diagnostic layout. Leo was stress testing the firm's core trading ledger before a multi-billion-dollar merger with a European conglomerate. He ran a deep forensic sweep, expecting clean data. Instead, his screen began to bleed anomalies. Hidden behind layers of encrypted shell accounts, nested deep within the proprietary code he himself had authored, Leo found a secondary system, a ghost protocol. Julian and Christian weren't just making smart investments. They were using Leo's algorithm to siphon billions from client retirement funds, routing the capital through offshore accounts to inflate the firm's valuation before the upcoming buyout. It wasn't standard corporate greed. It was a massive systemic financial fraud that would destroy millions of innocent lives if it ever went public. Leo's hands shook on the keyboard. He didn't just find numbers. He found the digital signatures of Julian and Christian, authorizing every single illegal transfer. Knowing the danger he was in, Leo immediately downloaded the entire transaction log onto an encrypted flash drive. But Leo was a coder, not a corporate strategist. He made a fatal error. He confronted them. In a private, dimly lit boardroom on the penthouse floor, Leo laid the data down in front of Julian and Christian. Christian's face drained of color instantly. He looked at Julian, his breathing suddenly ragged. But Julian didn't flinch. Julian simply stared at the paper, then up at Leo, his expression shifting into a calm, terrifying mask. "You're misinterpreting the data, Leo," Julian said smoothly. "I wrote the data, Julian," Leo replied, his voice firm despite the fear clawing at his chest. "The merger doesn't happen. If you don't self-report this to the federal regulators by tomorrow morning, I'm going to the authorities myself." Julian paused. He looked at the clock. Then he smiled. A warm, paternal smile that looked entirely real. "You're right, Leo. We've gone too far. Let's celebrate the end of an era tonight at the corporate gala. We'll sign the disclosure documents together in the morning. You deserve to see the world we built one last time." Leo felt a wave of relief. He nodded, believing the nightmare was over. He didn't see the subtle, microscopic nod Julian gave to Christian. The annual Apex Capital Gala was an exhibition of obscene wealth. The grand ballroom was a sea of silk dresses, designer tuxedos, and blinding ice sculptures. Leo stood near the edge of the room, completely out of place in his simple clothes, waiting for Julian to fulfill his promise. Julian approached him holding 2 glasses of premium champagne. Christian followed closely behind, his eyes darting nervously across the crowd, his collar suddenly looking too tight for his neck. "To the man who made it all possible," Julian announced, handing a glass to Leo, "to the future." Leo, wanting to put the tension behind him, took a deep sip. It tasted metallic, slightly bitter, but he dismissed it as the taste of expensive alcohol. Within 10 minutes, the room began to tilt. The bright chandeliers blurred into streaks of blinding light. The classical music warped into a deafening, chaotic roar. Leo stumbled away from the crowd, dragging his heavy limbs toward the quiet, isolated VIP lounge at the back of the pavilion. His chest tightened. His heart began to hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't the alcohol. With his vision failing and his fingers growing numb, Leo realized the horrific truth. They had poisoned him. With the last ounce of his strength, he pulled his phone from his pocket. His trembling thumbs bypassed the lock screen and opened a private messaging app. He didn't call the police. He knew Julian's lawyers would intercept the dispatch. Instead, he typed a single, frantic message to his identical twin brother, Felix. "Gala VIP room. Julian, drink. Don't trust them. Phone tracker on." Leo hit send. A second later, his phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the marble floor. His body seized once, violently, and then went completely still. When Julian and Christian slipped into the private room 5 minutes later, they found exactly what Julian had engineered. A tragedy. An unfortunate, unprovable medical event. Christian dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he checked Leo's pulse. He's not breathing, Julian. Oh my God, he's dead. We have to call an ambulance. We can say it was a heart attack." Julian grabbed Christian by the lapels of his tuxedo, yanking him up with brutal force. "Look at me, you idiot," Julian hissed, his voice a razor blade in the dark. "If the coroner finds that substance in his blood, the audit begins. If the audit begins, we lose the merger, we lose the company, and we spend the rest of our lives in a cage. Leo is gone. Right now, we survive." "What do we do?" Christian sobbed, tears ruining his expensive makeup. "What do we do with him?" "We make him a criminal," Julian replied coldly. "We delete him." Under the cover of a sudden, violent summer storm, Julian and Christian dragged Leo's body through the private service elevator down to the underground parking garage. They placed him in the deep trunk compartment of Julian's luxury sedan. They drove out of the city, leaving the glowing skyline behind, traveling deep into a desolate, abandoned nature reserve 2 hours north. In the pouring rain, using heavy steel shovels bought weeks in advance for a contingency Julian hoped he'd never need, they dug a shallow grave in the thick, black mud. Christian cried as he threw the dirt over Leo's face. "I'm sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry." Julian didn't say a word. He dug fast, hard, and efficiently. When the ground was flat, he patted the mud down with the flat of his shovel. He took Leo's phone, placed it in a lead-lined static bag to kill the signal, and threw it into the mud. "Leo stole $20 million from the firm tonight and fled the country," Julian stated, wiping the sweat and rain from his forehead. "That is the story. That is the only reality that exists now. Do you understand me, Christian?" Christian nodded, shivering in the cold. They drove away, confident the truth was buried beneath 6 feet of forgotten earth. But Julian forgot one critical detail. A master coder doesn't just leave code behind, he leaves a brother who understands exactly how he thinks. Felix hadn't been asleep. The moment Leo's frantic text popped up on his screen, Felix knew his brother was in mortal danger. He didn't run to the gala blindly. Instead, he made a phone call to a man named Jonathan. Jonathan was a legend in the dark corners of the tech world. A cynical, brilliant forensic data investigator and a lifelong friend of the twins family. Jonathan didn't work for the corporate lords. He worked for the truth. "Felix." Jonathan's voice crackled through an encrypted line, sharp, dry, and entirely devoid of fear. I've been monitoring Leo's primary backdoor at Apex Capital. The server just registered a massive data dump from his terminal, followed by a total lockout. Something is burning down over there. He texted me, Jonathan, Felix said, his voice deadly calm. He told me not to trust Julian. He said his phone tracker is on. Can you ping it? Give me 3 seconds, Jonathan muttered. The sound of furious typing echoed over the line. Got it. The signal was buried in a static block near the gala, but it's moving now. It's traveling north on Highway 9. They're moving fast, Felix. I'm mirroring the live telemetry to your dashboard now. Don't lose them. Felix tracked the digital beacon from a safe, unnoticeable distance, driving without his headlights through the dark, winding roads of the reserve. He parked his car half a mile away and walked through the thick brush, arriving just in time to witness the horrific sight of Julian and Christian burying his brother. Felix stood paralyzed behind a massive oak tree, his heart breaking into a million pieces. He wanted to scream. He wanted to charge out and kill them both with his bare hands. But he knew Julian's power. If he went down now, the truth died with them. The moment the taillights of Julian's sedan vanished into the night, Felix sprinted to the grave. He dialed Jonathan immediately. They buried him, Jonathan, Felix choked out, his fingers tearing into the wet mud. They killed my brother. Felix, listen to my voice, Jonathan said, his tone dropping its usual sarcasm, replacing it with an intense, cold gravity. Do not call the police. Apex Capital owns the local precinct. If you call them now, that body disappears from the morgue by sunrise. Dig him out. I'm bringing an independent medical transport to your coordinates right now. We do this by the book, but we write the book ourselves. Together, under the cover of darkness, Felix and Jonathan's trusted medical team exhumed Leo's body. They secured the lead-lined bag containing Leo's phone. By 4 a.m., the autopsy was being conducted in a private, unlisted clinic. By 5 a.m., the results were clear. A lethal dose of a rare synthetic compound. Felix stood in front of the clinic mirror. He looked at his face. The exact same eyes. The exact same hair. The exact same voice. They think they deleted a coder, Felix whispered, staring at his reflection. Jonathan stepped up behind him, leaning against the doorframe with a tablet in hand. Julian's firm is launching the narrative at 9 a.m. They're announcing Leo embezzled funds and skipped the country. What's the play, Felix? Felix adjusted the collar of a dark hoodie, Leo's hoodie. If they want Leo to be alive, let's give them what they asked for. At 9 a.m. the next morning, the executive floor of Apex Capital was filled with tension. Julian and Christian sat in the glass office, watching the compliance team scrub Leo's hard drives. Christian was sweating through his designer shirt, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold his coffee mug. Calm down, Julian growled, not looking up from his tablet. The data is wiped. The narrative is set. Leo is a ghost in Eastern Europe right now. We are safe. And then suddenly the glass door to the main floor clicked open. The entire office went dead silent. Walking calmly through the cubicles, holding a paper cup of black coffee, wearing a faded black hoodie, was Leo. Or rather, the man they believed was Leo. Felix walked with the exact same slight slouch his brother had. He kept his eyes lowered, looking down at his phone, completely ignoring the stunned stares of the staff. He walked straight to Leo's corner desk, pulled out the ergonomic chair, sat down, and opened his laptop. Inside the glass office, Christian let out a strangled, choked gasp. He dropped his coffee mug. The ceramic shattered against the floor, hot liquid splashing across his expensive Italian leather shoes. Julian, Christian whispered, his eyes bulging out of his head, his face turning an asymmetric shade of gray. Julian, look at the desk. Look at the desk right now. Julian turned his head slowly. For the first time in his entire life, Julian's perfect corporate composure shattered. His jaw went slack. His eyes widened into circles of pure, unadulterated shock. His breath caught in his throat. It's him, Christian stammered, backing away from the glass window as if he had seen a demon. We buried him, Julian. I threw the dirt on his face. I saw his eyes. He's back. He came back. Shut up, Julian hissed, though his own voice was trembling. It's a trick. It's an optical illusion. He survived. The dose wasn't enough. He crawled out. Julian forced his legs to move. He stepped out of the glass office, his heart hammering against his ribs, and walked toward the corner desk. Christian followed several paces behind, hiding behind Julian's shadow like a terrified child. Felix didn't look up until Julian's expensive shoes entered his field of vision. He tilted his head up, offering a quiet, perfectly innocent smile. "Morning, Julian." "Morning, Christian. Is something wrong?" Julian swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists inside his pockets to hide the trembling. "Leo, you're here." "Of course I'm here," Felix replied, his voice an exact match of Leo's quiet cadence. "We have the merger audit to finalize today, don't we? I wanted to make sure the code was perfectly backed up before the big meeting." Christian let out a small whimpering sound. Julian forced a terrifying, artificial smile. "Yes, of course, the code. Glad to see you're dedicated, Leo." Julian grabbed Christian's arm with an iron grip and dragged him back into the executive office, locking the door behind them. The rest of the day was an exercise in psychological torture. Felix didn't threaten them. He didn't confront them. He simply acted exactly like Leo, knowing that their own guilt would do the heavy lifting. Every time Julian looked out the glass window, Leo was staring back at him, offering a slow, deliberate nod. Every time Christian went to the break room, Felix would walk in a second later, stand completely silent next to him, and whisper, "It's hot in here, isn't it, Christian? Almost feels like being buried alive." By 3 p.m., Jonathan initiated Phase 2 of the deployment. Julian sat at his massive oak desk, trying frantically to review the merger legalities, when his twin-screen monitor suddenly flickered. The corporate wallpaper vanished. The mouse cursor locked up. Slowly, line by line, the screens filled with bright, glowing neon green code. It didn't contain financial data. It contained a single sentence, repeating over and over again in a cascading waterfall of text. "You can't delete what's already backed up." Julian slammed his hands on the desk. "Get the IT director in here right now," he roared. But before the door could open, Julian's personal cell phone buzzed. It was an anonymous text message. He opened it. It was a video file. With a sinking feeling in his chest, Julian pressed play. The video was a live stream countdown timer, ticking down in milliseconds. And beneath the timer were the exact geographic coordinates of the shallow grave in the nature reserve. Christian walked into the office right then, his tie completely undone, his hair disheveled, looking entirely insane. "Julian, it's him. I checked the server logs. Leo's private terminal is broadcasting data out of the building. He knows everything. He's going to destroy us. We have to go back. We have to check the forest." "He's playing with us," Julian shouted, though the green light of the monitor reflected the absolute panic in his own eyes. "If he's here, then who did we put in the ground? We're going back tonight. We checked the site. If the body is there, this man is an imposter. If the grave is empty—" Julian didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. At midnight, under a sky completely blacked out by storm clouds, Julian's luxury sedan tore into the nature reserve. The headlights cut through the dark trees like twin blades. Julian and Christian sprinted through the mud, holding powerful industrial flashlights, their breath coming in ragged gasps. They reached the clearing. They ran to the exact spot between the two rotting logs where they had buried Leo just 24 hours prior. Julian shone his light down. He froze. The ground was completely disturbed. The black mud was thrown wildly across the grass. In the center of the clearing was a deep, rectangular pit. The grave was completely wide open, and it was entirely empty. "No, no, no, no!" Christian screamed, dropping his flashlight into the mud. He fell to his knees, clawing at the empty air of the pit. "He came back! He crawled out of the earth! He's a monster, Julian! He's a ghost!" Julian's face was white. He stood over the pit, his chest heaving, his rational mind completely breaking down. "It's impossible. Science doesn't allow this. I killed him. I checked his pulse." "Looking for someone?" a voice called out from the darkness. Audio. A sharp, dramatic orchestral chord hits. The electronic beat shifts into an aggressive, driving tempo. Julian and Christian spun around slowly, their flashlights shaking violently as they swept the beam across the trees. Standing on a small ridge above the grave, illuminated by the bright white light of their flashlights, was Felix. He wasn't wearing Leo's hoodie anymore. He stood tall, perfectly poised, wearing a tailored, flawless three-piece black suit. His eyes didn't look like Leo's quiet, timid gaze. They were the eyes of an apex predator who had just backed his prey into a corner. "Stay away from me!" Christian shrieked, scrambling backward in the mud like a terrified animal. Julian stepped forward, his panic turning into a desperate, murderous rage. "What are you? How are you alive? I poisoned your drink myself. I watched your heart stop." Felix let out a low, cold laugh that echoed through the empty woods. "You think you killed me, Julian? You think a piece of trash like you could delete a legacy? You didn't just kill a coder. You confessed to it." Felix pulled a sleek, high-end recording terminal from his pocket and pressed a button. Instantly, Julian's own voice blasted through the clearing speakers, crystal clear. "If the coroner finds that substance in his blood, the audit begins. Leo is gone. Right now, we survive." Then Christian's voice played. "I'm sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry." Julian realized the terrifying truth in an instant. This wasn't a ghost. This was a trap. "You're his twin," Julian hissed, his jaw clenching as his survival instinct took over. "You're Felix. It doesn't matter. There are no cameras out here. There are no witnesses. I buried your brother, and now I'm going to bury you." With a savage roar, Julian launched himself forward across the pit, his hands reaching out like talons, aiming straight for Felix's throat, determined to silence the truth permanently. Before Julian's hands could even brush Felix's collar, the darkness of the forest vanished. "Federal agents, drop your weapons! Get on the ground right now!" Blinding high-intensity searchlights erupted from every single direction, turning the dark woods into a stadium of absolute exposure. Out from the brush stepped a dozen heavily armed federal tactical officers, their weapons drawn and lasers painted directly onto Julian's chest. Julian froze midair, slipping on the wet mud and crashing heavily into the open, empty grave he had dug for Leo. From the edge of the police line, walking calmly with his hands in his pockets and a sardonic smile on his face, was Jonathan. He held a receiver that was live streaming the entire audio feed directly to the federal prosecution database. "Excellent confession, Julian," Jonathan said, his voice dripping with cool, cynical satisfaction. "Clear audio, good acoustics in the woods, and a direct admission of first-degree murder. We didn't even need to subpoena your offshore bank records, though I already hacked those 3 hours ago anyway." Christian didn't even attempt to move. He lay flat in the mud, weeping uncontrollably, offering his hands up for the cuffs. "I confess. I'll tell you everything. Just don't let the ghost touch me." Julian was dragged out of the dirt by two massive officers. His face was covered in black mud, his expensive suit ruined, his empire completely demolished. As they shoved his head down into the back of a police cruiser, he looked up at Felix, his eyes burning with pure, unadulterated venom. "This isn't over," Julian hissed through his teeth. Felix stepped up to the car door, looking down at him with absolute calm. "You buried my brother in a ground of lies, Julian," Felix said softly, his voice echoing with the weight of absolute justice. "I buried you in the truth. It's over." The news of the Apex Capital downfall broke the next morning, moving through the global financial markets faster than any algorithm. The headlines were merciless. 2 corporate tech icons arrested for financial fraud and cold-blooded murder. The merger collapsed within an hour. The asset pools were frozen, and the multi-billion-dollar empire was completely liquidated by federal authorities to pay back the millions stolen from everyday citizens. Weeks later, the federal courtroom was completely packed. Christian, broken, empty, and filled with deep remorse, pleaded guilty to all charges, testifying directly against his partner. He was handed 25 years in a maximum security penitentiary, a sentence he accepted with a quiet, broken nod. Julian tried to fight. He hired the most expensive legal teams in the country, but you cannot cross-examine a digital signature or an explicit recorded confession of murder. The judge delivered the ultimate hammer of justice: life in prison with absolute zero chance of parole. The golden boy of Wall Street would spend the rest of his natural life in a concrete box, stripped of his wealth, his status, and his name. A few days later, the morning sun broke beautifully over a quiet, green hillside cemetery. Felix stood in front of a clean, white marble headstone. Engraved upon it in deep gold lettering was one name: Leo, the architect. Felix placed a single fresh flower onto the stone. He pulled his brother's master code drive from his pocket, looked at it one last time, and slipped it into his jacket. The code was safe. The family was secure. The debt was paid in full. Felix. I kept my promise, Leo. The truth is out. Narrator. Felix turned his back to the camera, walking away into the warm, bright sunlight, leaving the ghosts of the past exactly where they belonged. Because this story teaches us that no matter how much wealth you possess, no matter how much power you wield, every choice you make in the dark carries a consequence that cannot be hidden forever. True strength isn't about status or a corporate title. It's about responsibility, honor, and the courage to protect the people who trust you. Some secrets are meant to be buried, but the truth will always rise. What would you have done if you were Christian? Would you have called the authorities, or would fear have made you an accomplice too? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep, high-stakes psychological thrillers.